Chapter 2, Old Abraham's Words. Old Abraham was not from our village to begin with. He had come years ago, one rainy autumn, bringing with him only an old suitcase, a walnut cane, and a Bible with worn covers. No one knew exactly where he came from. Some said that he had been a history teacher in the city, others that he had worked on construction sites in the Middle East. But no one could confirm anything, because Abraham never talked about his past. You would see him first thing in the morning, walking slowly along the dusty road, his cane rhythmically tapping the gravel. He would often stop to look at the sky, as if everything he needed to know were written up there. He had hair as white as the foam of the sea in winter and a short but neat beard. However, his eyes were the part that attracted attention. They were not tired, old eyes, but clear and penetrating, as if they could see more than the rest of the people. The first time I heard the words "otherwise" was on a quiet afternoon in the café. Outside, a warm wind was blowing, but inside, the television was blaring about a new, strategic mobilization on the borders of a distant country. People nodded, commented nervously or sarcastically, until Abraham, without looking up from his cup of tea, said quietly, "The time has come for Gog of the land of Magog." The silence fell immediately. These names were not those of any modern politician. They did not appear on the maps I saw on the news. They seemed taken from an old story, and yet he spoke them with an unsettling certainty. An older man, who had worked at the port for years, snorted, "Gog, Magog. These are from Grandma's fairy tales." Abraham looked up, and there was no anger in his eyes, but a sharp silence. "They are not fairy tales. They are written in Ezekiel, long before we were born, and it is happening now." He took the Bible out of his old bag, with brown covers worn at the corners. He opened it to a place he knew by heart, and read in a low but clear voice, "And you will come from the farthest parts of the north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great multitude and a mighty army." Ezekiel 38 verse 15. On the faces of those in the café, a curiosity mixed with fear could be read. Some tried to smile, but their smiles were crooked. Others were watching the television, as if they wanted to compare the old man's words with the images on the screen. And what did they see? Columns of armored vehicles, convoys of trucks, thousands of soldiers in uniform, the iron horses that Abraham would later talk about. I was skeptical at the time, but something in his tone made me unable to dismiss everything. He didn't speak like a fanatical preacher, but like a witness who had seen too much. A few days later, I had my first serious conversation with him, outside, on the bench in front of the store. The sky was leaden, and the wind carried the smell of burnt smoke from several kilometers away. Abraham looked at the road and said, "In the scripture, there are not just stories, but warnings. Ezekiel saw how entire nations gather against a small country, without walls. And that war is not just between people.The is the beginning of the end." "And you think now?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "I don't think so. I know." He told me then about the prophecies that described a massive attack, with armies from the north, supported by others from the east, marching towards a final battle. He said that the biblical geography, if you read it carefully, matched the troop movements I was seeing on the news. "You don't have to believe what I say," he would say. "Just look at the map and see what lines up." But Abraham was not just a man of the scriptures, he was also an observer of people. He said that wars don't just start with weapons, but with hearts that are at odds. When hatred crosses borders into words, weapons just follow, he would tell me, tapping the ground with his cane. As global tension grew, the old man became more and more present in the village. He would come to the café, to the store, to the well, and talk to anyone who would listen. Read not only from Ezekiel, but also from Daniel and Zechariah, but Ezekiel 38 and 3:9 were for him the main map. You often heard him say, "And I will bring it to pass in the last days, and they will know that I am the Lord." He was not talking about a military victory of some state, but about a cosmic confrontation, in which God himself stops the war through supernatural intervention. Some avoided him, disturbed by the way he always brought up the end. But others, especially the elderly, sought him out. They asked him what he thought about certain events, if they were in the book. He answered calmly, but he never gave exact dates. "It is not our business to know the day and the hour," he would say, "but it is our business to recognize the signs." One evening, when the news was talking about a new attack on a major shipping lane, Abraham came to my house. He had never done this before. He sat down at the table and took out a bag, an old, yellowed map. It was a biblical map, with names of countries that no longer existed as such. He pointed to a point and said, "Here is the key. Here they all gather, and when they are here, there is only one battle left." I did not know then how close the moment was, but there was no fear in his voice, but the certainty of a man who knows the storm is coming, but has already found shelter. The days passed, and Abraham's words seemed less and less theory and more a chronicle of reality. New alliances appeared on the news, just as he had said. many peoples with you, and great armies were coming from the north, as he had. Quoted from Ezekiel. It no longer seemed like a coincidence. When I asked him if he saw a peaceful end, he shook his head. Not after all, it was written like that. It won't be peaceful, but for some, the end will not be fear, but a beginning. There was a light in his eyes that you couldn't explain in simple terms. It wasn't optimism, it was something deeper, as if he were looking over the edge of history and seeing what was coming after the last page, and the weeks that followed. More and more people in the village listened to him. Even those who had laughed at first now fell silent as he began to speak. And every time, Abraham concluded the same way. When the shadows gather, you have to know where to look, not at the darkness, but at the sunrise. And so, slowly, old Abraham became not just a village man, but a kind of watchman, a guardian of the ancient words that, somehow, seemed to come to life before our eyes.